The millionaire's baby kicked and punched every nanny, but kissed the new cleaner. Oliver Ashford was only 18 months old, but he had already earned a reputation that preceded him throughout the entire domestic staffing agency network of Manhattan. The cherubic-faced toddler with golden curls and bright blue eyes looked like he belonged in a Renaissance painting, but his behavior told an entirely different story. In the past 6 months alone, the Ashford household had gone through 14 nannies, each one leaving in tears, frustration, or sometimes both. The little boy had perfected an arsenal of tactics that would make any childcare professional reconsider their career choice. He would kick with surprising force for someone so small, his tiny feet connecting with shins and knees with uncanny accuracy. His punches, though not particularly painful, were relentless and always aimed at the most inconvenient moments, during feeding time, diaper changes, or when visitors arrived. The agency had begun to warn their employees about the Ashford assignment, some even refusing to take the job regardless of the generous compensation being offered. Daniel Ashford, Oliver's father, stood in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, running his hands through his graying hair in exasperation. He had built a technology empire from nothing, solved problems that had stumped Silicon Valley's brightest minds, but he couldn't figure out why his son terrorized every caregiver they hired. His wife, Elizabeth, had passed away shortly after Oliver's birth due to complications, leaving Daniel to navigate fatherhood alone while managing a billion-dollar company. He had tried everything: child psychologists, behavioral specialists, even a consultant who specialized in difficult children of the wealthy. Nothing worked. Oliver would behave reasonably well when Daniel was present, though still showing signs of his stubborn temperament, but the moment a nanny took over, the boy transformed into a tiny tyrant. The most recent nanny, a stern woman from Bavaria with 30 years of experience, had lasted exactly 4 days before declaring Oliver possessed and walking out mid-shift. The agency director, Mrs. Patricia Holloway, had called that morning to inform Daniel that they could no longer, in good conscience, send any more candidates. "Mr. Ashford," she had said in her clipped, professional tone, "we simply cannot ask our employees to work in what they perceive as a hostile environment. Your son needs professional help beyond what standard childcare can provide." Daniel had thanked her curtly and ended the call, feeling the weight of defeat settle on his shoulders. He loved his son desperately, but he was running out of options. His board meetings couldn't be postponed indefinitely, his international calls couldn't be rescheduled around tantrum times, and his business required his presence. He had considered taking an extended leave, but the company was in the middle of crucial negotiations that could determine its future for the next decade. Natalie Chin had never intended to work in a Manhattan penthouse. At 26, she had come to New York from a small town in Oregon with dreams of becoming an interior designer, but like so many young people who arrived in the city with stars in their eyes, reality had other plans. Her design portfolio, while impressive to her college professors, didn't open the doors she had hoped it would. After 6 months of rejections and dwindling savings, she had taken a job with a cleaning company to pay her bills while she continued to pursue her passion on the side. She told herself it was temporary, just until she caught her break, but 2 years had passed and she was still scrubbing other people's bathrooms and dusting their expensive artwork. The work was honest and paid reasonably well, especially when she landed contracts in the homes of the wealthy, but it wasn't where she had pictured herself at this stage of her life. The Ashford account had been assigned to her team on a Thursday morning. Her supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Gloria, had briefed them during their morning meeting. High-profile client, very particular about his privacy, very generous tipper if the work is excellent, Gloria had explained. The regular cleaner called in sick, so Natalie, you'll be taking the lead on this one. The place is a penthouse, so expect it to take most of your day. Mr. Ashford is apparently a widower with a young child, so be mindful of any toys or children's items. Natalie had nodded, gathering her supplies and reviewing the apartment's specific requirements. She had cleaned dozens of luxury apartments by this point and had developed an efficient system that usually impressed even the most demanding clients. She took pride in her work, even if it wasn't her dream career, because her mother had always taught her that anything worth doing was worth doing with excellence. When Natalie arrived at the Ashford building, she was struck by its grandeur. The doorman, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, greeted her professionally and directed her to the private elevator that served only the penthouse. As she rode up 43 floors, she looked at her reflection in the mirrored walls and smoothed down her hair, which she had tied back in a practical bun. She wore her company's standard uniform, navy blue scrubs that were comfortable and professional, and carried her caddy of cleaning supplies. The elevator doors opened directly into the Ashford foyer, and Natalie stepped out into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, the morning light streaming in and illuminating the modern, minimalist decor. Everything was in shades of white, gray, and chrome, with occasional pops of color from carefully chosen art pieces. "You must be from the cleaning service," a deep voice said, and Natalie turned to see Daniel Ashford approaching. He was younger than she had expected, probably in his mid-30s, with the kind of tired eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much stress. He wore an expensive suit, though his tie was loosened, and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "Yes, sir. Natalie Chun. I'll be handling your apartment today." She extended her hand professionally, and he shook it with a firm grip. "Thank you for coming. I apologize in advance for any mess. My son." He was interrupted by a loud crash from somewhere deeper in the apartment, followed by the sound of something rolling across a hardwood floor. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tightening. "My son is having one of his mornings. I'll be in my office if you need anything. Please, just do your best around him." Natalie had been working in the Ashford kitchen for about 30 minutes, carefully cleaning the marble countertops and organizing the scattered breakfast dishes, when she heard the patter of small feet approaching. She turned to find a toddler standing in the doorway, staring at her with an intensity that seemed unusual for someone so young. This had to be Oliver, the son Mr. Ashford had mentioned. The boy was beautiful, she had to admit, with his golden curls slightly messy and his cheeks still flushed from whatever activity had caused the earlier crash. He wore tiny jeans and a striped shirt, and one of his socks was missing. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Natalie felt an odd tension in the air, as if something important was about to happen and the universe was holding its breath. "Hello there," Natalie said gently, crouching down to his level. She had 2 younger sisters back home and had always felt comfortable around children. "My name is Natalie. What's yours?" The boy didn't answer, but he took a step into the kitchen, his eyes never leaving her face. Natalie noticed his little hands were balled into fists, and she wondered if this was the beginning of the aggressive behavior Mr. Ashford had alluded to. She had dealt with difficult children before. Her youngest sister had gone through a biting phase that had tested her mother's patience, so she wasn't particularly worried. She simply continued to smile warmly at Oliver, not moving toward him or making any sudden gestures. In her experience, children responded better when they didn't feel pressured or threatened. Oliver took another step forward, then another, until he was standing just a few feet from Natalie. She could see him studying her face, his small features serious and contemplative. Then, without warning, he launched himself at her. Natalie's first instinct was to protect herself from the kick or punch she assumed was coming, but instead, she felt small arms wrap around her neck and a warm cheek press against hers. The boy was kissing her, making exaggerated smacking sounds the way young children do, his tiny hands now gripping her shoulders as if he never wanted to let go. Natalie was so surprised that for a moment she simply froze, not sure how to react. This was clearly not the behavior Mr. Ashford had been expecting, based on his worried expression when he'd mentioned his son. "Well, hello to you too," Natalie said softly, gently returning the hug. Oliver pulled back to look at her face again, then broke into the most brilliant smile she had ever seen on a child. He started babbling in the mixed-up language of toddlers, occasionally throwing in a word that was almost recognizable: pretty, nice, stay. Natalie felt her heart melt a little. Whatever this child's reputation might be, whatever problems he might have caused for others, in this moment he was simply a sweet little boy who seemed starved for affection. She wondered how many of the previous nannies had approached him with preconceived notions about his behavior, perhaps treating him with caution or even fear from the very beginning. Children were perceptive. They could sense when adults were uncomfortable around them. For the rest of the morning, Oliver followed Natalie from room to room as she cleaned. He toddled along behind her like a devoted duckling, occasionally offering help that mostly involved moving things from where Natalie had just placed them. When she dusted the bookshelf in the living room, he handed her books one by one, his face serious with concentration. When she vacuumed, he pushed his toy vacuum alongside her, mimicking her movements with adorable determination. And every so often, he would stop whatever he was doing, walk up to Natalie, and plant a kiss on her hand, her arm, or whatever part of her was closest, before returning to his activities. It was the sweetest thing Natalie had experienced in a long time, and she found herself genuinely enjoying the little boy's company. Around noon, Natalie took a break to eat the lunch she had packed. She sat at the kitchen table, and Oliver immediately climbed into the chair next to her, watching with interest as she unpacked her container of noodles and vegetables. "Are you hungry?" she asked him, though she wasn't sure what the protocol was for feeding her client's child. Oliver nodded enthusiastically, so Natalie went to the refrigerator to see what she could find. Inside was a collection of expensive prepared meals from what looked like a gourmet meal service, along with various organic baby foods and snacks. She selected some sliced fruit and cheese, arranging them on a plate in a fun pattern, a skill she'd learned from making lunches for her sisters. Oliver's eyes lit up when she set the plate in front of him, and he began eating with gusto, occasionally offering Natalie pieces of his food, which she accepted with theatrical appreciation. Daniel Ashford emerged from his office around 1 o'clock, looking haggard and preparing himself for whatever disaster he might find. The house had been unusually quiet for the past few hours, which worried him more than noise would have. In his experience, silence meant Oliver was plotting something particularly troublesome. But when he entered the kitchen, he stopped short at the scene before him. His son was sitting at the table with the cleaning woman, both of them laughing at something. Oliver had a smear of what looked like mashed banana on his cheek, and the woman, Natalie, he remembered, was gently wiping it away with a napkin while making funny faces that sent Oliver into peals of giggles. The boy looked happier than Daniel had seen him in months. "I hope it's all right," Natalie said quickly, noticing Daniel in the doorway. "He seemed hungry, and I found some fruit in the fridge. I should have asked first, I'm sorry." She started to stand, clearly worried that she had overstepped some boundary, but Daniel held up a hand to stop her. "No, please, it's fine. It's more than fine. I've never seen him like this with anyone except me." He walked further into the kitchen, and Oliver immediately reached out toward his father, making grabbing motions with his hands. But instead of the demanding whine that usually accompanied this gesture, the boy was smiling, chattering excitedly, and pointing at Natalie as if he wanted to tell his father all about his new friend. Daniel picked up his son, feeling the familiar weight of him in his arms, and Oliver kissed his cheek before pointing at Natalie again and saying something that sounded like, "Natalie, nice." Over the next 2 hours, as Natalie finished her cleaning work, Daniel found himself watching the interaction between his son and this young woman who had appeared in their lives so unexpectedly. He tried to work in his office, but he kept finding excuses to walk through the apartment, ostensibly to get water or retrieve a file, but really to observe Oliver. The boy's behavior was completely transformed. There was no kicking, no punching, no screaming tantrums. Instead, Oliver was helpful, sweet, and constantly seeking Natalie's attention in positive ways. He brought her his favorite toys to show her. He read her books by pointing at pictures and making up stories, and he gave her approximately 100 kisses throughout the afternoon. It was the behavior of a normal, affectionate toddler, and Daniel felt a confusing mix of emotions: relief, confusion, and a touch of something that might have been jealousy. When Natalie was packing up her supplies at the end of the day, Oliver's mood shifted dramatically. He seemed to realize that she was leaving, and his little face crumpled. "No go," he said clearly, wrapping his arms around Natalie's leg. "No go, Natalie." Natalie knelt down and gently hugged him. "I have to go home now, sweetheart. But maybe I'll see you again soon." She looked up at Daniel questioningly, and he found himself nodding immediately, even though he knew this woman was a cleaner, not a nanny, and he had no business asking her to return specifically to see his son. Oliver was crying now, not the angry, manipulative tears he used to get his way with nannies, but genuine tears of sadness. It broke Natalie's heart a little, and she looked at Daniel with such concern that he felt compelled to speak. "Miss Chun," Daniel began, then paused, unsure how to phrase what he was about to ask. "I realize this is highly unusual, but would you consider, that is, I was wondering if—" He stopped, frustrated with his own inability to articulate a simple question. He was a man who negotiated million-dollar deals with ease, but asking this young woman for help with his son felt infinitely more difficult. "My son clearly has formed an attachment to you. I've gone through 14 nannies in the past 6 months, and none of them lasted more than a week. Most couldn't handle his behavior. But with you, he's been perfect. Better than perfect. He's been the child I always knew he could be, but rarely got to see." Natalie listened, still holding Oliver, who had buried his face in her shoulder and was making little hiccuping sounds as he tried to calm down. "I'm going to be very direct with you," Daniel continued, his businessman persona emerging now that he had found his footing in the conversation. "I need help with my son. I need someone who can be with him during the day while I work, someone he actually responds to positively. I know you work for a cleaning company, and I know I'm asking you to consider a completely different kind of job, but I'm prepared to triple whatever salary you're currently making. More, if necessary. I'm also prepared to be extremely flexible with your schedule if you have other commitments." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm desperate, Miss Chen. I love my son more than anything in this world, but I'm failing him. Today, for the first time in months, I saw him happy. I can't let that slip away without at least trying to make this work." Natalie left the Ashford penthouse that evening with her mind spinning. She sat on the subway heading back to her small apartment in Queens, barely noticing the usual crush of commuters around her. Daniel Ashford's offer played on repeat in her mind. Triple her salary would mean she could finally save real money, maybe even start her own design business sooner than she'd planned. But more than the money, she couldn't stop thinking about little Oliver and the way he had clung to her, his eyes pleading with her not to go. She had felt something click into place when she'd first met him, a connection she couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just that he was a cute kid. She'd cleaned houses with dozens of cute kids. There was something different about Oliver, something that called to her heart in a way she hadn't expected. When she got home, her roommate and best friend, Rachel, was cooking dinner in their tiny kitchen. "How is the fancy penthouse?" Rachel asked, stirring a pot of pasta. Natalie dropped her bag and collapsed onto their second-hand couch. "Strange. Really strange." She proceeded to tell Rachel everything about Oliver's reputation, his instant attachment to her, and Daniel Ashford's surprising job offer. Rachel listened with increasing interest, occasionally interjecting with questions. "So let me get this straight," Rachel said when Natalie had finished. "This tech billionaire wants to pay you 3 times what you make now to basically be a nanny to his kid? And the kid is super sweet with you, but apparently a terror with everyone else? Girl, this sounds like the plot of a romance novel." "It's not like that," Natalie protested, though she felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Mr. Ashford is just a desperate father who wants what's best for his son. And I'm someone who apparently can help. That's all." But even as she said it, she couldn't help remembering the look on Daniel's face when he'd watched her with Oliver. Something more than just relief, something softer and more complicated. Rachel raised an eyebrow skeptically, but didn't push the point. "So are you going to take the job?" she asked instead. Natalie bit her lip. "I don't know. It's such a big change. I mean, I'm a cleaner, not a professional nanny. What do I know about child development or early childhood education? What if I mess up?" "What if you don't?" Rachel countered. "Look, you've basically been helping raise your sisters since you were a kid yourself. You're great with children, we both know that. And it sounds like this little boy needs you specifically, not some fancy nanny with a degree. Sometimes connection matters more than credentials." Natalie knew her friend had a point. She thought about her sisters back home in Oregon, about how she'd been the one to comfort them after nightmares, teach them to tie their shoes, help them with homework. She'd never thought of those experiences as qualifications for anything, just as being a good older sister. But maybe they had prepared her for something like this. She pulled out her phone and looked at the business card Daniel had pressed into her hand as she left, his personal cell phone number written on the back in bold strokes. That night, Natalie lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She thought about her dreams of becoming an interior designer, about the portfolio she'd been slowly building, about the life she'd planned for herself. This job offer wasn't part of that plan. It was a detour, a deviation from the path she'd set for herself. But then again, her current job cleaning houses wasn't part of the plan either, and she'd been doing that for 2 years. At least this way, she'd be making significantly more money and potentially making a real difference in a child's life. She thought about Oliver's smile, about the way he'd kissed her cheek and called her nice. She thought about the loneliness she'd sensed in that beautiful penthouse, about a little boy who had lost his mother before he could even remember her, about a father who was drowning in responsibilities and didn't know how to reach his own son. The next morning, Natalie called the number on Daniel Ashford's business card before she could talk herself out of it. He answered on the second ring, his voice professional, but with an undercurrent of hope. "Miss Chen, I was hoping to hear from you." Natalie took a deep breath. "I've thought about your offer, Mr. Ashford, and I'd like to accept, but with some conditions." She heard him exhale, a sound of relief. "Of course. Name them." Natalie had spent half the night making a list of things she wanted to clarify. "First, I want a trial period, 1 month where we both evaluate whether this arrangement is working. Second, I want flexibility to take occasional design clients on weekends if opportunities come up. Third, I need you to understand that I'm not a trained nanny. I'm going to do things my way, based on my instincts and my experience with my own family. If you want someone who follows a specific methodology or curriculum, I'm not your person." Daniel listened carefully to each point, and Natalie could hear the scratch of pen on paper as he took notes. "Those all sound perfectly reasonable. I'll have my lawyer draw up a contract that reflects everything you've outlined. When can you start?" Natalie calculated in her mind. She needed to give notice to the cleaning company, tie up a few loose ends. "Monday? That gives me a few days to sort out my current commitments." "Monday is perfect," Daniel said, and Natalie could hear the smile in his voice. "Miss Chen, Natalie, thank you. You have no idea what this means to me, to us." After they discussed logistics and schedules, Natalie hung up and immediately called Gloria at the cleaning company. Her supervisor was disappointed to lose her, but understanding when Natalie explained the opportunity. "A wealthy single father offering triple your salary? Honey, you'd be crazy not to take that job. We'll miss you, but I'm happy for you." The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Natalie bought some new clothes appropriate for her new role, not quite as casual as her cleaning scrubs, but not as formal as office wear. She researched child development, reading articles about toddlers and their behavioral patterns, about attachment theory and emotional regulation. She called her mother in Oregon to tell her about the new job, and her mother had been characteristically supportive. "You've always had a gift with children, sweetheart. Trust your heart. It will guide you better than any textbook." Natalie also spent time thinking about activities she could do with Oliver, simple things like arts and crafts, outdoor play, reading together. She made a list of supplies she might need and sent it to Daniel, who immediately replied that he would have everything ready for her first day. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Natalie dressed carefully in dark jeans and a soft blue sweater, pulled her hair back in a loose braid, and took the subway to Manhattan with a large tote bag full of things she thought might be useful. When she arrived at the penthouse, Daniel was waiting for her in the foyer, looking almost as nervous as she felt. "Good morning," he said formally, then seemed to relax a little. "Oliver has been asking for Natalie non-stop since Friday. He's quite excited you're coming back." As if on cue, Natalie heard the patter of small feet, and then Oliver appeared, running as fast as his little legs could carry him. "Natalie! Natalie!" he shouted, launching himself at her with complete confidence that she would catch him, which she did. The first week was an adjustment for everyone. Daniel showed Natalie around the penthouse more thoroughly, pointing out where everything was kept: Oliver's toys, his clothes, his food preferences, his schedule. Or rather, what his schedule was supposed to be, because Daniel admitted sheepishly that Oliver hadn't followed it consistently in months. The nannies had all tried to enforce it, leading to battles of will that the toddler inevitably won. "Do whatever works," Daniel told Natalie. "At this point, I trust your judgment more than any schedule made by people who don't actually know my son." Natalie appreciated the freedom, but also felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about keeping a child entertained for a few hours. This was about helping shape his development, his behavior, his sense of security and love. Natalie quickly discovered that Oliver thrived on a combination of structure and flexibility. He liked knowing what was coming next, but he didn't like feeling controlled. So instead of enforcing rigid schedules, Natalie created a loose routine based on natural rhythms: breakfast when Oliver woke up hungry, outdoor play when he seemed energetic, quiet time when he got fussy, lunch when his stomach rumbled. She talked to him constantly, explaining what they were doing and why, giving him choices whenever possible. "Do you want to wear the blue shirt or the red one? Should we read books or do puzzles?" Small decisions that made him feel like he had some control over his world. And Oliver responded beautifully, his behavior improving day by day as he relaxed into the new routine. Daniel would emerge from his office periodically, ostensibly to check on things, but really, Natalie suspected, to reassure himself that the peace was real and lasting. Each time, he found Oliver contentedly engaged in some activity with Natalie, building towers with blocks, painting with watercolors, dancing to music, or simply cuddling on the couch while she read to him. The contrast to his previous experiences with nannies was so stark that Daniel sometimes had to remind himself this was his son, the same child who had kicked and punched and screamed his way through 14 caregivers. He found himself lingering in doorways, watching Natalie work her magic, trying to understand what made her different, what made her successful where others had failed so spectacularly. One evening, after Oliver had been put to bed, Daniel asked Natalie if she would stay for a few minutes to talk. They sat in the living room, the city lights twinkling through the enormous windows, and Daniel poured them each a glass of wine. "I want to understand," he said carefully. "What are you doing differently? How are you reaching him when no one else could?" Natalie considered the question, swirling the wine in her glass. "I don't think I'm doing anything particularly special," she said honestly. "I just treat him like a person, not a problem to be solved. I think maybe the other nannies came in with preconceptions about his behavior, approached him like he was broken or difficult.
Kids sense that.
They know when adults are afraid of them or expect them to act out, and sometimes they fulfill those expectations because it's easier than fighting against them." As the weeks passed and Natalie's trial period came to an end, everyone agreed that the arrangement should continue. Oliver had transformed into a cheerful, well-adjusted toddler who still had his moments of typical 2-year-old stubbornness, but nothing remotely like his previous behavior. Daniel's work life had stabilized now that he could rely on consistent childcare, and he found himself actually looking forward to coming home at the end of the day. The penthouse, which had felt cold and empty since Elizabeth's death, was now filled with laughter, music, and the chaotic evidence of a happy child. Toy trains scattered across the living room floor, crayon drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, small handprints on windows that Natalie insisted didn't need to be cleaned immediately because they were memories in the making. But the new arrangement brought unexpected complications. Daniel found himself increasingly aware of Natalie not just as his employee but as a person, a young woman with her own dreams, interests, and life beyond his penthouse walls. He noticed the way she hummed while she worked, the way she laughed at his son's antics, the way her face lit up when she talked about design. He noticed these things more than he should, thought about her more than was appropriate for an employer thinking about an employee. He told himself it was just gratitude, just relief at finally having stability in his home life, but he knew he was lying to himself. He was attracted to her, drawn to her warmth and authenticity in a way he hadn't been drawn to anyone since Elizabeth. Natalie was experiencing her own confusion. She loved her time with Oliver. The little boy had completely captured her heart. But she was also becoming increasingly aware of Daniel as more than just her employer. She noticed the way his face softened when he looked at his son, the way his entire demeanor changed when he left his businessman persona at his office door. She noticed his kindness, the way he asked about her day and genuinely listened to the answer, the way he never made her feel like just the help. They'd started having dinner together sometimes, the three of them sitting at the kitchen table like a family, and those evenings felt dangerously comfortable, dangerously right. Natalie knew she needed to be careful. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for her employer, couldn't risk the job that was allowing her to save money and finally work toward her design dreams. The situation came to a head one evening when Daniel came home early from work to find Natalie teaching Oliver to dance in the living room. Music was playing from the speakers, something upbeat and joyful, and Oliver was holding onto Natalie's hands and stomping his feet enthusiastically while she laughed and encouraged him. Daniel stood in the doorway watching them, his briefcase still in his hand, and felt something shift in his chest. This was what he wanted for his son, what he wanted for himself. This joy, this lightness, this feeling of home. Natalie caught sight of him and smiled, holding out a hand. "Come dance with us," she called. And before he could think better of it, before his businessman's caution could stop him, Daniel put down his briefcase and joined them, taking Natalie's hand and letting himself be pulled into the moment. Later that night, after Oliver was asleep and Natalie was preparing to leave, Daniel asked if they could talk. There was something in his tone that made Natalie nervous, a seriousness that suggested this wasn't going to be about scheduling or Oliver's diet or any of the normal employer-employee topics they typically discussed. They sat in the living room again, but this time there was no wine, just the two of them and the weight of unspoken feelings hanging in the air between them. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Natalie had come to recognize. "Natalie, I need to be honest with you about something, even though I know I probably shouldn't say anything. I know it's inappropriate given our professional relationship, but He trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. "You've brought something back into this house that's been missing since Elizabeth died," Daniel continued. "Not just for Oliver, but for me too."
Joy.
Warmth. The feeling that this place is a home and not just somewhere I sleep between work commitments. And I've developed feelings for you that go beyond gratitude or professional appreciation. He held up a hand before Natalie could speak. "I'm not asking you to reciprocate or even respond. I just needed you to know because I don't want there to be dishonesty between us. If this makes you uncomfortable, if you want to leave, I completely understand. I'll give you an excellent reference and more than fair severance. But if there's any chance that you might feel something similar, then I wanted you to know you're not alone in it." Natalie's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure Daniel could hear it. She had been pushing down her own feelings for weeks, telling herself it was just gratitude for a good job, just affection for a sweet child, just appreciation for a kind employer. But hearing Daniel voice what she'd been afraid to admit even to herself, she couldn't hide from the truth anymore. "I do," she said quietly. "Feel something similar, I mean. But Daniel, I'm scared. This job has given me the chance to save money, to work toward my dreams. What happens if we try something and it doesn't work out? I lose not just a relationship but my job, my stability, and my connection with Oliver. That's a lot to risk." Daniel nodded, understanding her concerns completely. "You're right. It is a lot to risk. And I would never want you to feel pressured or trapped. Maybe we should take things slowly, see where this goes naturally without forcing anything. You're not just an employee to me anymore, Natalie. You're someone I trust, someone I respect, someone I care about deeply. Oliver loves you, and that alone would be reason enough to want you in our lives permanently. But I want you here for you too, not just for my son." They sat in silence for a moment, the honesty hanging between them, scary but also liberating. Natalie reached out and took Daniel's hand, feeling the rightness of it, the natural fit. "Slowly," she agreed. "We take things slowly, and we're honest with each other every step of the way." 6 months later, the Ashford penthouse had transformed into a true home. Natalie's design touches were evident throughout: plants on windowsills, cozy throw blankets draped over furniture, warm lighting that made everything feel more intimate. Oliver, now 2.5, was thriving, his vocabulary expanding daily, his personality blossoming into something joyful and curious. And Daniel and Natalie had found their way to each other carefully, mindfully, building something real on a foundation of mutual respect, shared love for an amazing little boy, and genuine connection. They had learned that sometimes the best things in life come not from following the plan, but from being open to unexpected possibilities. The millionaire's baby who had kicked and punched every nanny had kissed the new cleaner, and in doing so, had brought together a family that none of them knew they needed, but all of them had been waiting for.